At first, I was like, ah! But now that I've had time to absorb it,
I love the online world. I now have friends that I prefer to communicate with in the online world because with all the tricks of like emojis and videos and jokes and online ways to communicate, they're amazing. I meet them for a coffee and I'm like, oh my God, you're dead boring. And I might be one of those people myself.
Yes!
Anything that you want to think and hold to be true, you'll find a community. This is hugely valuable for people who have suffered harms, people who are questioning their identity. The flip side of all of that is the cultish behaviors.
Is it Narcissus's pull? Is it reflecting ourselves back, or is it a fun palace mirror that just distorts? It's sort of both. It's an echo chamber for all of our major societal concerns to then be replicated over and over again.
The pro-social is in a constant war with the antisocial.
I don't give up!
And it's not one algorithm. It's hundreds and thousands of them competing with each other. Social media companies are like DJs. And a good DJ controls the room. And it's insidious because you don't hear the music. Because you start sweating and you start quivering. And you start getting angry and you start getting anxious.
Why are you giving him attention?
Before you even realize
You back up!
that there's a manipulation, there's a dark signature, there's a dark pattern behind the emotions that you feel as a consequence of feeding off the content.
I lived in a world before the internet existed, so I clearly remember like a before and an after, and I got to see that transition. Like, I feel lucky to have seen it. Obviously, the internet started and we had email, and it was like a very naive, kind of curious time. And there was like this delight to meeting and sharing. I remember being on a goth forum in the 90s that I really loved, and it kind of had this self-moderation thing where if people came onto that forum and were being awful to other people, there'd sort of be this group of like elders on the board that would tell them like, no, like don't do that. And if they persisted, they'd get kicked off.
I was born in 1977, and some of my first memories, in fact, my first memory is of war. And channeling that was what drew me into the study of disinformation. I set up South Asia's first Twitter account for civic journalism in 2007. And remember, this was the time of the Arab Spring. This was the new digital Berlin Wall moment. There was democratic potential in the use of these technologies in the hands of individuals and citizens. So that was the early hope.
We've got an innovative new way to create applications for mobile devices, and it gives us tremendous capability, more than has ever been in a mobile device.
I noticed a sharp shift in 2012. The moment Facebook and Twitter were made available on smartphones, almost immediately, the most violent forms of extremism linked to religion embraced the potential of these platforms to spread and promote harmful messaging. Here was this two-faced monster, simultaneously promoting and producing harm. It's hard to pinpoint where it started, apart from saying that it certainly didn't start in the United States, where Facebook started. And when it was pointed out, Facebook ignored it.
Over 30.
Healthier. This is Karen.
Democratic kids! All of you! Get that on camera!
We got it.
It's just chaos driven by these social media giants. It's like pushing people towards conflict, because more conflict means more engagement.
Should I try a real cat?
The thing is, even if you do know that you're being manipulated, it's like crack for the brain. Like, it's really fun. And even some of the most hideous, insidious stuff online in conspiracy land.
Prime ministers were involved in pedophilia.
It's really entertaining and it draws you in.
They're kicking us off. I don't know why. Let it go viral.
We're responding to code that has been written to keep eyeballs on screens, to keep monitoring your behavior, how quickly you scroll through videos. So you slow down your thumb from scrolling and you fixate, even if it's just for a few seconds, they will feed the algorithm to then give you more of what you want.
Is that right?
So even for somebody who's, 8 or 9 years old, that's an important thing to know. We're now rewiring our brains to constantly be checking back in, snacking back on the devices. And I think what's going to be interesting to see now is how well we evolve into this next phase of living with digital technology.
I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut.
I am exposed to some of the darker spots of the internet. I'm a cultural historian, and I'm particularly interested in the ways in which science and technology in the 20th and 21st century have replicated or increased disunity, racism, misogyny. And at heart, I'm really interested in these larger stories of disinformation. The way we distinguish it when we're thinking about misinformation and disinformation is about the intent of the person who is sharing it. So misinformation is inaccurate information that's been created with no malintent. Disinformation is a Cold War term from propaganda studies and from understanding calculated campaigns to create information that's incorrect and have it dispersed. Those of us who had been interested in these things had been watching what had happened in the UK in 2016 with Brexit. And we'd seen the proliferation of tools of the internet to tweak public opinion.
This will be a victory for real people, a victory for decent people.
And in the United States, with the Trump presidency.
When you get to 2016, what it really shows is the power of Facebook on the American electorate and the British one as well. So many Americans get actually most of their news and their political understanding from Facebook that you don't need to launder your message through the mainstream media anymore, who will fact check it, whether it's a state-based influence or, fringe groups. It's just a lot easier to have that influence.
Emergency has been declared, giving the government special powers to combat the spread of COVID-19.
The pandemic is the ultimate amplifier for disinformation and some of these sort of fringe and extremist beliefs. It's no longer just the people who are socially isolated, who spend enough time on the internet to fall down these dark rabbit holes. Suddenly in the pandemic, everyone has the time to spend on the internet.
So we knew that COVID-19 was going to be a Trojan horse issue where People who are not ordinarily exposed to conspiratorial thinking and conspiratorial ideas would have a lack of knowledge because it's a new thing. And so they go out seeking information and come across information that has been shared to them with malintent to bring them into a disinformation space. And that information wouldn't just be about COVID-19, but would contain within it ideas about who's responsible for the virus, and then link into broader conspiratorial thinking.
For the unjabbed, we read
the language of RNA.
So today is part of the awakening. With social media, you can share the awareness, you'll then awaken your soul.
Oh, the New World Order and what they're trying to do, they're trying to collapse the economy, which they've already, to bring in the one world currency. I mean, surely you must know. I can't believe that you don't know.
I don't know. So
yeah, of course you don't.
I actually don't.
Well, go and research it then.
So
it's quite simple.
What's been interesting is, in the context of the COVID pandemic, a lot more people were kicked off of places like Facebook and Twitter. And suddenly there's a much bigger audience for some of these alternative social media platforms.
I'm on Telegram. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on I watch Telegram.
The big one that has come out is Telegram, and it's had problems with violent extremist content in the past. There was a lot of propaganda videos by ISIS and by ISIS-linked influencers. And in the aftermath of the Christchurch terrorist attack in 2019, a lot of the violent extremist elements migrated to Telegram in particular.
Actually stop this great reset.
Suddenly in the pandemic, people who are much more moderate than those violent extremists,
This is the day.
they're steeped in a lot of this stuff because that's the pre-existing ecosystem that's there. But what it's really done is created a community that is not rooted in reality.
It's all happening now.
I don't think I ever really expected there to be a far-right terrorist attack in Christchurch, even though there were far-right groups here.
Christchurch, there have been multiple deaths and many more people are injured after a gunman opened fire at 2 mosques in Christchurch this afternoon.
I saw the screenshot of his 8chan post and it was immediately obvious. This is an alt-right terror attack by somebody who has lived in that online alt-right world, and it's happened here. It's happened, just a few kilometres from where I was sitting at the time.
Yeah, and we're rolling. Action.
Propaganda. What is it exactly? I started the YouTube channel not long after the Christchurch shooting as a way to get information out about the far right. News probably depends on your own worldview. The new alt-right is a bit of a different beast than the old sort of skinhead scene that we had here 15 years ago. And I'd started watching that scene as early as 2014 as I watched Gamergate emerge online. Gamergate was a movement of sorts by a lot of angry young men who targeted women in the video game industry with harassment. A lot of those young men saw themselves as the oppressed group. People who were adults and still living with their parents. This is my generation that sort of graduated after the economic crisis of 2008, and there weren't a lot of jobs for them to go into, and the jobs there weren't well paid. And it was this escape from the bleak reality of their existence to go into these sort of virtual online fantasy worlds.
Exploring the roles and representations of women in video games.
And when they saw, feminists starting to criticise video games...
And we haven't even kissed. We can remedy that right now.
Or they saw game studios adding in a gay character to a game, that angered them because they felt this is an encroachment on their domain. And that group of angry young men online were harnessed to be a part of a more reactionary political movement. Breitbart News, where Steve Bannon was the editor, hired the tech blogger Milo Yiannopoulos to write sympathetic coverage of Gamergate. Breitbart News were calling themselves the platform for the alternative right. And I remember growing up in the Bush years, it was, very uncool to be a conservative. But this was an alternative way to reject those aspects of the political left that they didn't like feminism and anti-racism. And so rather than seeing themselves as being allied with
You know, some of these groups that are even more marginalised than them, they saw themselves as an opposition to that.
Mr. Trump! How's it going, Mr. Trump?
These young men started saying things like conservatism is the new punk rock. And they felt that they were taking on the elites, taking on the establishment by voting for a multimillionaire.
What the hell do you have to lose?
Trump is a genius at priming people to think in terms of us and them, and also to view their public interactions as competition rather than cooperation. It's uncanny how successful the whole authoritarian social media ecosystem has been. It's really transnational now. I learned from a guy called Klaus Televide, and he read all of the memoirs of the people who were the sort of volunteer proto-Nazis in what became Nazi Germany. And he wanted to find out what made them vulnerable to incorporation into places like the SS. All of them had a sense of deferred entitlement as members of a group who were traditionally privileged, and it seemed like that privilege was being withdrawn from them. They had what is often called authoritarian personality, which is when you're only comfortable as part of a really rigid hierarchy where you're so-called kissing up and kicking down. Inequality is rising quickly, so they're looking for the source of their trouble, and anyone formerly disadvantaged socially who seems to be rising is going to be a target for their anger. Whether it was women or gay people or foreigners of any sort. And they fantasize about reducing them to a shapeless mass. But one thing that I find very disturbing about recent developments is that these same people who were content to increase the tribalism of politics in the United States are now focused internationally. And for authoritarians like Trump and like Steve Bannon, it's so easy for them to believe that they represent majorities, because for them, everyone who's not like them doesn't count. One of the things that makes it more possible for the Steve Bannons of the world to get traction here is the fact that we have let our competitive advantage in democracy slip. When I moved to New Zealand from Texas, the social egalitarianism was just amazing. What we do notice is that it's declined. The very wealthiest gained enormously during the pandemic, while the rest of us really suffered. And we can see from looking at the rest of the world that it's a really dangerous trend.
There's certainly a consciousness on the part of the biggest misinformation spreaders that there are certain ways they can leverage the pandemic and people's frustration over it in order to accomplish some of their pre-existing goals. There's a lot of recruitment activity from people like white supremacists and white nationalists who see the pandemic as an opportunity to grab people who are now left out on the edges and to pull them deeper into something much darker.
Want to make jelly on a budget? Grab some lilac. You can draw people in lots of different places. And each of the platforms are used in different ways.
Hello, friends. As you can see, I'm working on my would-be bag.
What is known internationally as the kind of trad wife set of viewpoints, which is white, Christian, a lot of pseudo-Celtic, pseudo-Nordic ideologies behind it. They use Pinterest and Instagram to draw in other women who are interested in interior design, children's clothing, knitting, healthy food for children. And it does draw people in towards a set of white nationalist ideas. I mean, it's relatively easy to see. If you see a very beautiful, fair-skinned, blonde or red-haired child with beautiful braiding in her hair and some flowers, just step back a little bit. Which is really distressing because that's my heritage.
All cooking with the girls. And us women, I think what we have to do is sometimes back off and be that little submissive person.
One of the things we've seen the most is hyper-masculine framing, an extremely toxic masculinity. So, you know, to be a man is to be someone who's armed, someone who's prepared to kill on behalf of women and children.
And I think a lot of males out there know things aren't right. So I'm here to look after the woman.
The South men have got to stand up, we've got to be counted.
And very fixed ideas about gender roles, race, ethnic identity, national identity, nationalism, and rights to things like free speech that are very influenced by a totally US-centric model.
Misinformation is morphing and changing so incredibly quickly, and these stories spread really easily. I mean, QAnon, at its simplest, it was an internet troll making some stuff up on a terrible message board. It started in like a very comical way, like Donald Trump was at a filmed meeting and he said this really cryptic term.
You guys know what this represents?
Tell us, sir.
Maybe it's the calm before the storm.
What? And then everyone online, what's the storm? What are you talking about? Someone at the press conference said to Trump, like,
What storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out.
Weird thing to say.
Thank you, everybody.
Trump says a lot of ridiculous stuff. I don't think he meant anything. I don't think he knew what he was saying. But that statement started getting pulled apart on this message board on 4chan. The storm is coming was interpreted as being a secret informant within the government coming out with information on the deep state and the people that were really pulling the strings. And this story jumped over onto social media to a point where suddenly mums and dads are talking about it.
What is the plan? It's to save the world.
We don't know who particularly Q is. Q is a movement.
It's really just a military intel who tells you to think for yourself.
It says think for yourself.
A cult wouldn't tell you to think for yourself.
They think that Trump literally is going to reveal all the bad actors on the planet.
You guys in the media are going to be totally shocked one day when they arrest them all and they cart them off to Guantanamo Bay.
And this deep state cabal has made a lot of their money through child trafficking.
They sacrificed these
That's
children.
where we are at.
How did they get power? They slaughtered children, drank their blood?
They think the pandemic was invented in a lab to depopulate the planet, that Bill Gates is heavily involved.
Bill Gates did this. He's a genocidal maniac. I mean, you have to stop him.
Hollywood is trying to normalize pedophilia.
It sounds like lunacy, but that's what unfolded.
We're taking back our country, and it's going to be biblical.
These grand conspiracy theories explain like why you're not doing as well in life as you wanted to. And there is a satisfaction to thinking that you hold this secret knowledge about how the world is run, and that there are these dark forces controlling us that we have to push back and fight against. Something I started noticing with a lot of the people that had fallen into conspiracy theories about the deep state. You know, a lot of them had evangelical backgrounds, and evangelical Christianity primes you to think that in this dimension, like all around me right now, like hidden is this fight between like good and evil. It's literally demons and angels kind of fighting. You're primed, if you believe that, to jump into all the narratives that QAnon is giving you, because QAnon is the most epic story of all time of like these hidden evil shadowy forces ruling the planet, and like us freedom fighters being able to like fight back. Of course, that's never going to happen because none of it's real. but it's a really tempting thought.
Take your hands off our children! Take your hands off our government! Tell the truth! 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 Media! Tell the truth about the females and pedophiles!
When even the normies wake up and realise how many lies you've told, you won't be forgiven. You won't be forgiven.
Part of the problem with this misinformation and this extremist content is not just that it is wrong, but that it puts the stakes so high that violence becomes rational.
Traitors! Leave our children alone!
Our forefathers have fought for this land, and you don't ride roughshod over it because some girl in a skirt is on a power trip!
If you look at the Nazi occupation of Europe in the 1940s, it was rational to form an underground resistance that was violent and that attacked Nazi officials. So if the world that you live in is rooted in a fictional world where politicians are putting out a vaccine that is literally killing children, it's not necessarily an irrational jump to go, I should do something about that. And violent action might be justified.
I think we should just bring it back to Nuremberg and execute these people.
PM me if you would like to be part of a jury that is bringing things to justice. Please come forward and we can take this government down.
New Zealand, fucking wake the fuck up! Sunday, we will be here every fucking day!
If you have 200 people on Telegram saying they want to hang politicians, well, they're not all serious about it, but what if one of them is? It actually only takes one person who has been mobilized and who has the means to commit violence for something to go really horribly wrong.
You've always had psychotic individuals in society, all over the world, in any country. Now you have them algorithmically connected, which is a frightening prospect. I don't think societies have quite grasped the implications into the future of what foundations are being laid today and have been laid for a while. It's the algorithmic amplification of psychosis. You want to know what my day is? Like, what's like, how do you want it? I study 130 Telegram channels and groups, and that's about 5,000 to 6,000 posts and comments a day. Some of it you have to read humanly, some of it is computationally managed. So you see spikes, and then you go to a spike, and then you see what drove that spike, and then you go to that post, and then you see who engaged with it. And then you drill down. It gives you a profound insight into the mindset of the individuals on these channels. Prime Minister Ardern would be the one who gets the most amount of violence directed at her on a daily basis on the landscapes that I study. And it is extraordinarily violent. It extends to her daughter and her partner. She's seen as a monster, blood-sucking leech, quite literally expressed as demonic, and in a very Christian way, satanic. It's evil. You can't negotiate with evil, because when you dehumanize an individual, it's easier to imagine and normalize violence. You don't think twice about killing a mosquito. It is I'm like, my struggle is a real one to communicate how bad this is and how toxic this is, because there's people articulating public executions, military tribunals, hanging, and it's explicitly rape and torture. And post-mortem torture as well, so they want to rape after they've killed. And it is a hellscape that is being used by about 350,000 people in this country. And they're all grooming, they're all harvesting. And it's here. It's amongst you.
I received 2 anonymous death threats at the start of the month. One of them made the claim that people were tailing me everywhere I go, asked how it felt to know I had less than 6 months to live. A more overtly racist run arrived a couple of days later. This one said that the time of people like me walking around unscathed was over. A local far-right activist came to my workplace, just walked into the office filming.
This is Byron Clark, the coward. I know where he lives.
It's a pretty significant escalation from what I've had before. The latest threat I got was an email saying I should watch my mouth or they will kill me and I will bleed out slowly. Quickly followed by another email from the same person saying that they go to the same supermarket as me. It's feeling like something violent happening. It feels more likely than a year ago or even 6 months ago.
There's lists of those people who are going to get executed when Nuremberg 2.0 takes place. Those who are responsible for implementing or supporting the COVID-19 framework, and I'm on that list. I'm on many lists, and many of my colleagues are on lists. I've had to inform colleagues that they're on those lists. You know, that's really distressing. In the last year, a key individual has posted my image and then repeatedly posted images of hung doctors after Nuremberg, which is, you know, to me is very much a death threat. I have a process. It sounds really silly, but as a historian, on a normal day, I might be going into the archives to do archival research. And when you go into the archives, lots of people don't know this, but you're supposed to have clean hands because you're touching, archival things. And so you go and wash your hands. So it's quite ritualistic. I've washed my hands and I take a big deep breath and I acknowledge that some of the things I'm going to be reading might be upsetting to me. And then I do the same when I finish with that text. I sort of close it and I breathe and I go and wash my hands again. And I find that really helps me keep a sense of separation. And so I actually do the same thing when I do my work at the computer. But yeah, I mean, it is hard to talk about with my husband and my children.
It's not that you're lonely, but you're very alone. Profoundly alone. I have a Sri Lankan counsellor who's generally helping me with stuff. And Kate has her own counsellor who's helping, so we cope. But you can't, you just, for a variety of reasons, I mean, nobody would understand in the first place. I have 2 showers a day because you try to wash away the sins of your work, knowing full well that you do it for the right reasons, but the vulgarity, the venom, the viciousness is constant, and it's white hot. In that evening shower, which is a hot shower, it's a long one. My Instagram is full of dogs and cats. It's because the algorithm has got used to my late night scrolling and joy scrolling, which is nothing to do with the work. And so I have trained the algorithm well to not present me with anything that's of topical or contemporary or political interest. And I walk. And try to reconcile the nature of what I see and the nurture of it with the nature that surrounds me.
Years ago, we used to talk about the internet as being a bit of an escape from the world. Now I like to use the real world as an escape from the internet.
The answer to who is behind disinformation is that a lot of it is organic, and a lot of the people who are doing the recruiting and the radicalizing are not themselves puppet masters hiding behind the screen and tugging at strings. They're just similar people who fell down the rabbit hole just a little bit earlier. But if Steve Bannon or if Peter Thiel funds a website that starts a conspiracy theory and that makes its way to New Zealand, even if the people who are spreading it in New Zealand are not receiving money from overseas, certainly the whole effort wouldn't have happened without that money to begin with.
Increasingly over the last 2 years, it's felt like players and agents of disinformation are trying out some things on our democracy to see if they work. There is definitely a sense that we are a country that is hackable. We're a small social democracy. We're highly transparent. And those features make New Zealand a really interesting place for people to experiment with upsetting what social democracy looks like.
You're seeing an awakening throughout the world. It's pretty amazing. In New Zealand, they're the canary in the mine shaft. That's why we got to pay attention to what's going on in New Zealand and Australia.
After the invasion of Ukraine, there's something very curious that studies around the world agree on, which is that pro-Putin and pro-Kremlin content became such a dominant signature in the anti-vax communities globally. And the places that the Russian propaganda was promoted and celebrated was in channels that were pro-Trump and pro-MAGA. I mean, everything that you can imagine you could associate with QAnon were the ones who were virtue signaling Putin as the savior of the world order and promotion of Putin as hero. Sometimes even saying that the genesis of the pandemic were in the Ukraine.
Like Russia at the moment, because they're taking care of the deep state and smashing Biden, Hillary Clinton and all them, and the deep cabal, and which basically Ukraine is a cesspit.
And when you start pulling at that string, then the curtains start coming down. And then you start unraveling what is actually a global network of disinformation, linked to certain states, in as much as can be determined. And they are from businesses and industry leaders. They are ex-politicians associated with a certain political ideology and religious leaders. And we are witnessing globally the contestation of liberal democracies in ways that you would have thought ended with the end of the Cold War.
Frankly, we did win this election.
This is nothing less than an epic struggle between good and evil.
Uncertainty, anxiety, anger is the purpose of disinformation and misinformation. It's an internal cancer that rots society from within.
Disinformation is such a terrible threat to successful democracies. It's like the weaponization of some of our most intimate faculties as human beings. Trust is really the foundation of, I don't want to exaggerate, but trust is the foundation of everything good and right that we can experience together. And without it, we're done for. And it's a sort of cascade effect. As soon as you no longer trust everybody to be contributing to the public good, you don't want to be the last patsy standing while everybody else is, kind of getting by on the sly.
Yeah, call the police.
Some kind of fucked up dystopia.
The deep fakes,
incredibly convincing.
President Trump is a total and complete dipshit.
There's a video of Obama out there where it looks like it's a real legitimate video of him, and it's a totally synthetic video, right? Same with this person does not exist. That website, which is completely 100% AI generated. None of these people exist. It's all just facial features that have been created by AI. This is what's out there. Think about the stuff that is happening right under our noses that we don't know about, that we think is real.
We've never had companies play this much of a fundamental role in geopolitics. So we need to kind of think about this as a global problem. And there are intergovernmental research groups on information disorders that does treat it as a global virus that requires a global community to address it. Not unlike climate change, actually.
What is next is different levels of interaction that will be indistinguishable from online, offline. Those worlds will just melt together. You won't know what reality is outside of your own preferences and your own experiences. But I think the change is exponential.
Hey, what's up?
And it's happening.
So this is the main spot where we meet together to co-work. You know, it's really a beautiful space, this.
The metaverse is constructed by private companies who call the shots instead of democratically elected governments. But if these places are where we have all of our social interactions and they're not actually public spaces, that throws up really fundamental issues about, is that how we want to live our lives?
Hey, are you coming?
Yeah, just gotta find something to wear. All right, perfect.
It's kind of like a sort of corporate feudalism in that, you know, with feudalism, the lord owns the land, the lord owns everything around you, and you're sort of just allowed to eke out a living on their lands.
It's an enormous mistake for us to allow the metaverse to be subject only to the rules of its private owners, because that means the well-being of everyone who enters there is going to be dependent on the arbitrary whim of the owner. If all the economic activity is happening in the metaverse, then it is not a legitimate argument to say people freely signed away their rights. What it means to be a member of a democratic country is to participate in those rights. Isn't it funny? Like, there are so many terrible things happening in the world today, but I'll tell you what, I'm feeling very positive because the digital world is a platform for the genius of bands of youth everywhere. This generation of digital natives are skeptical and interested in plural verification, and they know how to network with each other outside of official channels. And they're incredibly cynical about hierarchy and authority. And well might they be. They're not going to be expecting corporations to be acting in their interests, which is something that people of my generation frequently did.
Business as usual, blah, blah, blah. Show me what democracy looks like!
This generation of digital natives are devoting enormous amounts of time and energy to making the world that they inherited better because they have a really strong sense of how many things are wrong with it. And I'm just grateful to them.
Whether the digital world kills us before climate change does, I don't know. It's like a race to the bottom. That's what I feel like on most days.
So not hopeful?
No, I'm not going to be the hopeful end to your film. It's not good in my mind. And yet there's a small part of me that holds out hope that maybe there's a way through, you know?